John Wester and the Catholic Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Santa Fe. And I'm here to speak regarding the proposed reinstatement of the death penalty in our state of New Mexico. And first of all, I do want to say very sincerely how tragic it is to see these terrible crimes committed against our children and innocent victims, our police officers. Our hearts go out to the families who've lost their loved ones to these horrific crimes. But I think strongly that violence does not stop violence, and that's why I'm here today. It took years, as you know, for us here in New Mexico, long before I came. About 12 years, I hear, a process of 12 years, a bipartisan process that voted out the death penalty in our state. And I personally find it offensive that now we're trying to reinstate that death penalty, that same death penalty, in the dead of night, in the dark of night, something that was previously debated and considered in the light of day. It's disturbing that, with the exception of the sponsor of the bill, nobody who voted for the bill argued in favor of it. This gives the impression, to me anyway, that this is not the merits of the issue that are at play, but rather what I would call political jockeying. To me, and I know this is a strong word, I find it blasphemous that the state seeks to take a human life. I believe that only God can give and take human life. The death penalty should not be about punishment, but rather it should be rendering the perpetrator harmless to society. I grant, and it's very important to say, that the state does have a very direct responsibility to defend our citizens. But the death penalty is not necessary in our country to do that. We have resources and we have technology to protect our citizens without the death penalty. Given our limited means in New Mexico, I believe it would be unethical to take away scarce resources from programs that will help to prevent violence in the first place. Our church, and I know I'm speaking for my brother bishops in Las Cruces and Gallup as well, and also I would say for many of my fellow church leaders in New Mexico, our churches are involved in these kinds of issues because they are ethical issues. I believe it is unethical for our legislature and state leaders to push through this bill rapidly and without due consideration. This, I believe, is an abuse of the legislative process for campaign jockeying. If our legislators who support this bill really believe that it's the right thing to do, I call upon them then to put it in the 60-day session when the legislative process can run its normal and legitimate course. I urge our senators to leave this legislation on the table for the 60-day session when the merits of the legislation for or against can be discussed. I believe it's in this context that the common good can best be served. There are many, many arguments that we've all heard, especially when we vetted this in our state right before 2009, that can be brought out. We certainly can point to the many innocent people that are on and have been on death row. We can point to the fact that if a mistake is made, you can't undo it once you've executed somebody. We can point to the fact that research shows that the death penalty is not a deterrent. We can point to the fact that the so-called death penalty club around the world is not a list that the United States or New Mexico wants to be on. I believe that God works in all of our lives. And I believe that the one day we take a human life, execute a person, could be the very day that that person found reconciliation with himself or herself and with his or her God. The death penalty, sadly, will not bring back those who have been killed through these horrible crimes that we've seen in our state. However, putting resources into programs that will prevent these crimes in the first place will help to ensure that we live in a safer society. In my view, the death penalty continues and even promotes a culture of death and violence. We need to change that narrative to a culture of life. I am urging our legislators to do just that by opposing this ill-advised bill. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Michael Vigil. I am a retired district judge here in Santa Fe. And I'm here today because of my concern about the inclusion of a number of crime bills in this special session. These bills call for the enactment of laws that will lengthen prison sentences and allow the state the right to pursue the death penalty in certain cases. My concern is based on my experience, both as a practicing lawyer for 17 years and 18 years as a district judge presiding over criminal cases. There are several reasons for my concern. First of all, a special session does not allow for the careful consideration, deliberation, and debate that these serious matters require. It also deprives our citizens of the ability to be here present to voice their concerns on such important matters, especially the decision to grant the state of New Mexico the power to kill another human being. Second, this session is currently dealing with a severe budget crisis, which will require budget reductions at most state agencies and departments. These bills, if enacted, will have a major impact on several departments or agencies of this state. Corrections will be required to house more prisoners for longer periods of incarceration at a time when the Corrections Department is having difficulty fully staffing their prisons at their current capacity. The District Attorney's Office will be asked to take on major death penalty cases without the resources to do so. The public defender will be called upon to provide effective representation to not only those charged with a capital offense, but also those who are being charged with offenses which will now require longer sentences, without the personnel or resources to meet constitutional standards. The courts will be called upon to process these cases in an already crowded and underfunded court system. They will be asked to do all of this at the same time and at the same session where their budgets are being cut. Last night, or early this morning, one of the sponsors of the death penalty bill made a statement on the floor that the capital offense death penalty cases would not cost any more than a case that is life without parole. She didn't cite any studies. She didn't give us what was the basis of her opinion. I wanted to point out that in the state of Nebraska, the state of Nebraska is going through a process right now very similar to what happened here in New Mexico. They repealed the death penalty, and now there is a move to reinstate that death penalty. And unlike what is being attempted here, the state of Nebraska is undergoing studies to measure the economic impact of the death penalty on the state of Nebraska, should they reenact the death penalty. And the conclusion that they came to is that not only are these cases more expensive than life without parole, but these cases will cost, from the date of prosecution to the date of execution, each case will run $1,493,500. And those costs include everything from the prosecution, the defense, the courts, incarceration, and execution. For the representative and sponsor of this bill to say it is not going to impact these agencies' budgets is outrageous. The governor was right when she initially stated her intention to call a special session for 1 or 2 days to deal strictly with the budget shortfall. All of these crime bills are more appropriate for the 60-day session in January, where the careful deliberation, debate, and input can occur. So why are we here? New Mexico has experienced some very horrific crimes involving the murder of police officers and innocent children. These crimes were shocking beyond belief, and I cannot believe or understand or ever understand the sorrow and grief that it has caused the victims' families. The governor is attempting to ramrod these crime bills through a special session without the proper consideration, deliberation, and debate that our democracy requires. It's outrageous that the governor has decided to take advantage of these horrific crimes and the emotional fallout for political gain in the November elections. Even the victims of these horrific crimes should not be used for political advantage, but should be given an opportunity to come to the Roundhouse and express their support for these bills and have their opinions carefully considered during the 60-day session. Just to show you how fast and unthoughtful and how quick they were trying to ram these cases, this bill through, the original bill on the death penalty was so poorly drafted that it probably would not have survived a constitutional challenge. The bill has since been amended to remove the unconstitutional provisions, but it's just an example of the lack of careful consideration that should be taken when you're asking the legislature to allow the state of New Mexico to put another human being to death. The criminal justice system in this country is the best in the world, but it is not perfect. Occasionally, the system does not work, and innocent people are convicted. Let's not forget New Mexico's experience with the death penalty, where 4 innocent men were convicted and sentenced to death for a crime they did not commit. They sat on death row awaiting execution when the real killer confessed, and they were freed. Those legislators who oppose the consideration of these bills during the special session will be portrayed by the governor as being anti-police and anti-children. In an era where the public has lost faith and trust in our government institutions, we cannot erode that trust further by allowing the governor to use this special session to gain some cheap political advantage. These matters should all be referred to the 60-day session, where they can be handled, as the Archbishop indicated, in the light of day, not at midnight, not at 3 o'clock in the morning, when the public is not present. They should be handled openly and with the seriousness that they deserve. And thank you.
Thank you. We'll take some questions.
Archbishop, you mentioned the difference in the debate that New Mexico had a few years ago. I know you weren't here at the time. What kind of debate would you expect in, say, a 60-day session on an issue like this?
Well, for me, I think the legislative process, as the judge said, allows for this kind of debate where people can come forward on the merits of the bill, and those can say why they think it's a good bill, why those they say it's not a good bill. And that should be the focus. But that debate hasn't taken place here. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned, from what I read so far early this morning, is that all those who voted in favor of this bill, reinstatement of the death penalty, didn't say one word. What I heard was they were catching a few Z's in the room next door, and they came out and voted. So there's no engagement with the issue. There's no engagement with the points of the issue. And so that's what we need to hear. Why did the proponents of this bill say it's necessary? What's it going to do for our state? What's it going to do for our people? What's it going to do for the victims of violent crime? Those are the points that have to be resolved, and the legal issues have to be looked at. And we have a long history in our country of dealing with capital cases, and so I think those are the kinds of points that have to be brought out. The legislative process is being hijacked by the political jockeying.
Archbishops, good morning, sir. Have you spoken yet to the governor or any Republicans about this?
To this date, I have not, but I'm not surprised in a way because it happened all so quickly. This is all just coming about very rapidly, and frankly, I get the impression that not no one wants to speak too much about this. They want to get this through and do it as quickly as they can. So no, I have not yet spoken to her, but I welcome such an opportunity.
At what point did you decide to get involved in this process? Was it when they just decided to put the death penalty on the ballot, or was it just the fact that it's in a special session?
Well, the long answer for me was probably when I was ordained a priest in 1976, because I've been for the sanctity of human life all my ministry. And so I was so proud when I came here to New Mexico a year ago to see that we had, in '09, abolished the death penalty. And so I am here simply because of the sanctity of human life. I'm not much of a politician or don't understand the process that well, but I do understand people. I love people, and I love the fact that God has given us the sacredness of human life, and that's why I'm here to promote this.
Question for Judge Vigil. Judge Vigil, you were on the bench during the death penalty phase of the Michael Astorga trial. What was that like for you? Were you conflicted in those moments? Do you recall how you felt about that kind of a case? Because it seems now that you are fairly strongly opposed to the death penalty.
One of the things that you do as a judge is you don't substitute your own personal opinions for what the law is. And if the law calls for certain penalties and for certain crimes, as a judge, your role is to enforce the law. And even though I may be opposed to the death penalty, if I was put in the position where I had to impose the death penalty and that all of the constitutional requirements were followed, I would be required to do so. So it's tough. All of the cases are tough, but particularly murder cases are very difficult for all of us who are involved in them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.